Thank you very much. And first, I will introduce our speakers. And first, we'll have Paul Mines, who is an independent consultant and fellow of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, former vice chair of its Resource and Environment Board. And he's the lead author of Decarbonization, a briefing for Actuaries, published by the IAA in November 2018, and Pension Fund ESG Risk Disclosures, published also by the IAA in December 2020. Then we will listen to Esko Kivisaari, who is a fellow of the Actuarial Society of Finland, and the penultimate chairperson of the Actuarial Association of Europe. He's working as Vice Managing Director of Finance Finland, industry lobby of insurance banks and other financial actors in Finland. He was also a member of the 2017 high-level expert group of sustainable finance of the European Commission. I've heard several presentations from him on environment and other similar issues. It will be a pleasure, Esko. And we'll also have Sarah Wilson, the founder and CEO of Minerva Analytics, the UK's independent ESG research and proxy voting agency. Minerva research and data are widely used by global regulators, asset owners, asset managers, and academics to support their investigation into the impact of ESG development. And I'm really eager to hear about all these developments and how actuaries can eventually make a difference on this. So please be my guest, Paul.
Thank you, Abe, and hello from London. First slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, almost all institutional investment managers around the world now claim to integrate ESG criteria into their strategies and processes. So why do they do that? Many studies have shown that long-term investment performance is likely to be enhanced if that is done, and also volatility will be or should be reduced. And apart from the direct financial consequences, as we shall see, some of these risks, these ESG risks, they do have big reputational risks for the trustees of pension funds and also the sponsors, as we shall see. By the way, I should say here, most of my comments are in relation to pension funds. That's my background. But they're also just as applicable, almost equally applicable to insurance companies and other financial institutions. Yes, these trends, there's also an interest from pension fund members, and I think this is also increasing the pressure on trustees. Litigation, there was a very interesting case in Australia, which was settled at the end of last year, where quite a young member of the pension fund, sort of David and Goliath situation, he sued the trustees of this major pension fund, one of the industry-wide pension funds in Australia, and can you go back a slide, please? The litigation carried on for a bit, but the trustees eventually settled, and they actually gave the litigant virtually everything he'd asked for in terms of ensuring that the trustees took account of climate change in their investment strategies and policies. So that was one example, but I think it's it could be an example which could be repeated in other countries around the world. These issues are not just of interest to investment consultants. If you're an actuary involved in investment consultancy, it obviously is. But also if you're an actuary involved in pension funding, these are issues which can affect the performance of the investments. Also, it affects the sponsor, the person who actually, the employer, who contributes to the pension fund. Next slide now, please. Yeah, this is it's quite an old example now. BP, There was a terrible disaster just over 10 years ago in the Gulf of Mexico. Many people killed, and astronomical damages incurred by BP when they were sued for the consequent pollution and clearing up by the governments, the local states, local businesses, and local people. So it was a huge lesson, and a lot of in the post-mortem on that disaster, a lot of them can be traced back to ESG type issues. Next slide, please. These are some more examples, a range of ones. The Volkswagen case was an amazing example where the company was deceiving the American car emissions regulators. And of course, they weren't just doing that in America, they were doing that in other countries as well. And it's interesting because it wasn't just one or two people in the company who were involved in this activity. It seemed to go right across the country. So an amazingly bad example of culture getting entrenched in the organisation. The Sydney Morning Herald is completely different. It concerns money laundering, which is a criminal offence, of course. And this bank, Westpac, got involved in money laundering, dealing with crooks, and eventually it led to the resignation of the chairman and chief executive. Again, it's another example where culture can get into an organisation where things like this can be overlooked because they're doing a tremendous amount of business until it eventually causes a disaster. Another disaster, the Vale Dam disaster. This is where a mining company was storing water which had been used in the mining cleaning, or when they're cleaning the ore, the process. This is kept in dams, sort of earth banks, and eventually the dam gave way and polluted the surrounding area with a big, even for a company as big as Vale, it was a big compensation bill they had to meet, and of course many people had died. And then the other one on the left-hand corner is one where a factory in the developing world collapsed, leading to the deaths of literally thousands of people. Now that one is a terrible disaster, but it's an example of a case where a multinational company in the developed world, is one of its suppliers is actually working in the developing world. And increasingly we're seeing, perhaps through social media and the like, that these sort of problems come back to hit the company in the West, because their customers don't like buying clothes from factories which are unsafe. So it comes back to hit the multinational, and they're increasingly accepting that they have to try and monitor what happens in their suppliers and do something about it if it's not satisfactory. Next slide, please. This is just a list. I wouldn't say it's a comprehensive list, but it's of some of these ESG issues, some of which we've already come across, like waste and production. I mean, forced labour under the social heading is quite topical currently. You've got a situation in China where it's alleged that the Uyghur population, parts of it, is being used on a sort of slave labour basis to produce cotton. And of course, if that cotton is being sold to companies, and it eventually it comes into a store in New York or London, it can become a real issue for that end user or the end seller. Issues like board independence, obviously important. Are the directors of the company, have they all been on the board for 20 years and become part of the furniture? Or are they really independent? Conflicts of interest, that can be in the board itself, of course, where company assets may be sold to other companies where people have a conflict. And executive compensation, very controversial area, of course, but for the pension fund or insurance company, it wants to know if it's a shareholder in a company that the executive compensation is aligned with the same interests as the pension fund. They're all working towards the same game, same eventual target. If the compensation is too short term, then the company is likely to adopt very short term targets, possible to the detriment of the long term, which is basically the interest of the pension fund. Next slide, please. Yes, working through the IAA, we did a survey last year using the IAA Pensions and Employer Benefits Committee, and we looked at the situation in 14 countries around the world, which are listed there, which are the major countries for funded pension schemes. You can obviously see some of those countries, quite big countries like France or Italy, they have quite small funded schemes because those countries have very big unfunded arrangements. So that's why they're relatively small. USA obviously dominates and is probably as big as all the others put together. Interestingly, partly because a lot of the occupations like teachers and workers in the United States are in funded pension schemes, whereas in other countries, like in the UK, our teachers and our workers in the health service are all in unfunded schemes. So that means our funded total is that much less than the US total is that much larger. The next slide, please. We looked at these issues in the survey, how funds split between defined benefit and defined contribution. And of course, most of the funds which are in existence now have arisen from defined benefit pension schemes. That was the prevalent type up until now. DC is becoming more prevalent now. It's interesting that governance is similar in many parts of the world. You have a separation of powers between the company, the employer, trustee, they may not call it a trustee, some sort of trustee function, and the members of the pension scheme. And we looked at developments in ESG and say litigation and stewardship. I'll come on to stewardship a bit later on. Next slide, please. Yeah, what we found is the ESG legislation is increasing all around the world. So at the moment it's a work in progress, but there's a lot happening, and particularly in Europe, which I'll come on to, but also in the other parts of right around the world. And who knows, maybe in America. Can you go back a slide, please? Maybe in America there'll be more to say in that front. I mean, the Americans have had, of course, some legislation which touches on not so much ESG, but things like fiduciary responsibilities with the ERISA, the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, which goes back about 40 years, I think. A SIP is quite a common feature in all this ESG legislation, the Statement of Investment Principles, which describes how the fund goes about incorporating ESG into its practices. And so I'll come on to the Europe later. TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, what we found is these are starting to be implemented, these recommendations which came out in 2017, they are starting to be implemented by the major funds, and obviously they're held up to some extent by the companies in which they invest, what they're doing. Major companies are again starting to apply the recommendations, and the funds are too. I mean, pension funds can apply them, even if the companies in which they invest don't. But obviously the recommendations are going to be much more meaningful the more disclosure we get. Next slide, please. Just going through quickly what's happening in Europe. It's quite a lot, really. And of course, with the 27 countries in the EU, it is a major part of the world economy. And to some extent, the work they've done in the EU is setting the scene, if you like. It's providing a template for what other countries may do over the course of time. As I say, it's ESG is front and center in everything they're doing here with the SIP. Risk management is very much part of it. Next slide, please. The pension scheme's audit report and accounts have got to be publicly available. I should say here that the regulations, well, two things really. The regulations only apply to larger pension schemes, basically schemes with 100 members or more. But also these overriding directives from the EU are actually implemented by each member state. So you've got 27 member states, and they implement them according to what they think is right for that particular country. So you find countries, their implementation can vary by country, and also some are quicker than others. Just as a plug for the UK, we have implemented quite a few of these directives already, even though we've now left the EU. Next slide, please. The SRD, it's the Shareholders' Rights Directive. This gets into the really nitty-gritty, if you like, of pension fund management, because it's describing what you're doing when you're handling your investments, how far you're involved with engaging with the companies in which you invest. And there have been a number of quite high-profile, it's very much an increased activity, and a number of high-profile examples of where the shareholders have got together as a group and either privately through private meetings or through public votes managed to convince the company to change its policy. And that's particularly a case, obviously, in the oil industry, where people like BP and Shell have disclosed strategies to reduce their carbon footprint, to at least have some recognition of the global warming and the need to align with what's in the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. And there's more to come. So in the EU, you're not sure of legislation, and there's more here with these disclosure requirements. It's aimed at, it includes pension funds, but it certainly includes insurance companies and other players in the financial market, brokers and these sort of people. So it will help customers and members of pension schemes. And ESCO are probably going to say more about some of those, particularly the European Green New Deal. Next slide, please. And this is coming from a different perspective. The International Organization of Pension Supervisors. For those who haven't come across it, it's what it says on the tin. It's an organization of the people who regulate pension funds around the world, the pension supervisors. It's a body, they get together and exchange views and work out the best way of regulating pensions. And it's got quite a big membership, which covers most of the major sources of funded pension schemes around the world. They produced these guidelines in 2019. They are guidelines. Obviously, this organization can't impose requirements, but these are the guidelines which they're hoping the members of that organization will follow in developing their own policies. Next slide, please. Yes, stewardship, which I mentioned earlier. I've included this because I think in some ways it's a revolution in terms of the way stewardship has been defined. The first two lines are fairly conventional. Stewardship, responsible allocation, management, and oversight of capital to create long-term value for clients and beneficiaries. That sort of wording I might have learned some years ago now when I was a student, You know, in those days we said it was maximising investment returns, having due regard to risk, something of that sort of nature. It's a purely narrow financial approach. But the last line of this definition is the revolutionary bit, it seems to me. So it's leading to sustainable benefits for the economy, the environment and society. So they're putting the stewardship of investments right in the context, not just of the particular pension fund or institution for which those funds are being managed, but also in relation to its role in terms of wider society. And I suppose that reflects, I suppose, a number of things. You know, to use the phrase we're using now with COVID, we're all in this together. And people are saying they don't want a fantastic pension when they retire, if they're retiring into a world which is polluted and subject to horrendous climate change. So they want the people who are managing the investments to have regard to slightly wider things. But this stewardship code in the UK has been produced by a number of the leading lights in our financial sector. So it's not they're not revolutionaries themselves, but I think what they've produced is very revolutionary. It is voluntary, but many large pension funds have adopted. And similar stewardship codes have also been developed in Australia, India, Japan, and Switzerland. Another point to bear in mind, it's similar to something which the UN PRI espouses. So it's the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, which is an organization which, as its name implies, promotes responsible investment. And anyone who signs up to the PRI undertakes to a number of things, but basically to manage their investments responsibly for the longer term, similar to this UK stewardship code. And the interesting thing is that most of the investment managers right around the world, so the US, Europe, Asia, they've signed up to the UN PRI, and they do report on their approach. I mean, it's not, again, I wouldn't say it's not all sweetness and light, but they've signed up to it and they can be held to account for it. Now you might say, are we getting too much in the clouds here? Are we getting too visionary? So let's look at the next slide, please. Here I've looked at the stewardship of corporations, and it's quite interesting. I mean, they're not randomly chosen, but I could have chosen any number of mission statements from corporations, and this is the sort of wording you tend to find, that the company is looking to have a positive social impact. It's going to foster inclusive economic growth, social sustainability for business and for society. So they're seeing their role as a business, you know, to make money, to maximize profits, but also in the context of a wider society. Now you might say, again, it's right to be skeptical, because we've seen lots of examples where people have very high ideals in these sort of statements, but they don't always live up to it. But I think these things are relevant, and they do provide a marker. So if a company doesn't live up to it, what they put in their mission statement, in their report and accounts, you've got something to test them, a marker to test them against. And also more disclosure, more ESG disclosure will provide more evidence from which they can be judged. Next slide, please. Yeah, it's just talking about some practical points on ESG. I've touched on this question of divestment or engagement. Quite a few large pension funds have been subject to campaigns where NGOs of various sorts, they get up a campaign to get them to sell their oil shares or whatever, their coal stocks and things like that. Well, coal they probably would, but the oil stocks, I would say most large investors now take the view that the best thing to do is to engage with their company rather than just sell the stock. If they sell it to somebody else who may not have the same approach to long-term investment. So the general view now seems to be engage. Only if that doesn't achieve any sort of result do you consider divestment. Obviously, you've got to be reasonably large to do that on an individual basis. Passive funds, of course, many pension funds and other institutions, their money is invested on a passive basis now. They're just invested on the index. They invested in every stock. And of course, if you invest in every stock, you've got no choice. You can't divest. And so you've got to engage if you're large enough. Climate change, there's a number of aspects to that. A number of metrics, which I think Sarah may be coming on to talk about, which is very much in the development stage as to what can be done to measure your portfolio. So I won't say any more about that. Social impact is quite an important area, becoming a more important area. And one of the things is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which I think every country, virtually every country in the world signed up to a few years ago. And achieving something in relation to those goals is difficult. It's obviously, there's a lot of very hard, demanding goals in that list of 17. But many companies are seeing what they can do in relation to those goals, and also pension funds. I mean, pension funds are not businesses. Pension funds don't run businesses. They invest in companies which run businesses. So there is a limit to what they can do, but that is an increasing aspect. And with social impact, you have to take account of your fiduciary duty to do the best for your own beneficiaries. You don't want to prejudice that. So it's a question of balancing the social impact with those fiduciary duties. Next slide, please. Yes, just to say something about the smaller funds. You are more restricted, obviously, with a smaller fund. But what you can do is think ahead. So before you appoint your investment manager or buy the unitized fund or pooled fund you buy, have a look at make sure you look at how that manager or that pooled fund, how that addresses ESG, so that you're going to be happy with what they're doing in the future. Also, you may be able to work together with other pension funds. There are a number of ways pension funds can do that, or insurance companies. So you can work with other people, so you can you can be more effective working together. And on things like disclosure, these days it's much easier to satisfy some of these quite demanding requirements with using the internet. Once you produce these documents, you can put it on the website, and members of the general public, or members of the scheme, and the general public can see it. It's not an expensive issue. That's all I'm going to say at this point, and I'll go back to you, Abe, now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yes, we surely will get back. Please, Esko, your turn.
Thanks. Do you see my purple slide now?
Yes, we do.
And Abe, was it, I have 2 hours or was it 3 hours for my presentation?
Yes, more or less.
But just how much time do you have for me?
25 minutes.
Okay.
I will let you know when you are 5 minutes from.
All right, good. Yes. So, hello everybody. Nice to be with you. Hello from Helsinki, Finland, from the outskirts of nowhere, more or less. So happy to speak in this webinar. I'm not a consulting actuary. I'm often told to be an insulting actuary instead, but trying to drag you along with some thoughts on the issue of prudential regulation of financial institutions. I am starting with some general remarks, mainly on the environment side, and then some historical remarks on how things have developed. But I will go through them fairly quickly and then arrive to this prudential regulation area. So yes, one of my really high experiences in this area was that I was nominated to this high-level expert group on sustainable finance of the European Union. About 20 persons looking at what should be done to make finance part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. And it very much started from what Mark Carney, who was back then the governor of Bank of England, stated that the challenges posed by climate change pale in significance compared with what might come. The far-sighted amongst you are anticipating broader global impacts on property, migration, and political stability, as well as food and water security. So why isn't more being done to address it? And then it turns, or it bumps into this issue that our globe is finite. Anyone who believes in indefinite growth of anything physical on a physically finite planet is either a madman or an economist, said by the economist Ken Boulding. And then the situation is that there are countries whose lifestyles are such that they are sustainable. They use resources less than the whole amount of what we have on Earth. They are like countries like Bangladesh, India, Uganda, China. But then when we look at the developed world, if everybody would live like the French, it would need two and a half times the amount of resources our globe has. The United States people living like the US people would require more than 4 Earths to sustain. And there are even places like the United Arab Emirates needing more of the resources. So that's the bad news. The good news is that in many areas, we are using resources in a very wasteful manner. So we can achieve quite a lot by being more clever in how we do things. And one of the examples from the book mentioned here is about mobility system, where more or less everybody has a car, but most of the time the car stands parked in typically parked for 92% of time. And then even when you're driving, you are not using all seats. Then the engines are very inefficient. Most of the fuel never reaches the wheels. And additionally, there is the problem of accidents all the time. So there's a lot to improve in this area without losing anything in our real happiness, our wealth, our well-being. And the second part of the good news is that there are only 3 value chains taking 70 to 80% of most resources, and these are in addition to mobility that I mentioned. They are food and housing. So and there are really promising technologies on how to make more efficient use of resources to make really to make it possible for 7+ billion people on Earth to live really good lives without overextending the resources of this globe. Then about the bad news with the climate change, it's not only the only thing. It's I think it's a misnomer to call climate change global warming, because global warming sounds like the distribution moving to higher temperatures as such. But the bad news with the distributions is that the distribution is moving towards higher temperatures, but at the same time it's flattening, which means there are not only more extreme cases, but also much more heat as such, which really changes things and creates a world that's more dangerous than what we have today. If I look back in my history of talking about climate change, I think I have a slide from about 20 years ago about the role of insurance industry, and it summarizes it as identification of risks, increasing risk awareness, analysis of risks where they happen and what we can do, risk prevention, and of course carrying of risks. But this was really all about like coping with the physical risks. What is different today is that the thinking has gone from PR departments to the boardroom. It's the sustainable development issue is a key strategic issue, as mentioned in the previous presentation. It is discussed in the boardroom. Insurance aspect, like the physical risks, are still crucial, but the greatest attention goes to financing and investing. And also, one could say that there was talk of ethical investments 20 years ago, but now we have the concept of responsible investments. Ethical investments have the problem that it's a personal issue, what you think is ethical and what is not. But this is the concept of responsible investment can be defined very clearly, and there you can agree on the content. There I would refer back to what the previous presenter told about the UN PRA, Principles of Responsible Investment. The big thing happened with the TCFD task force of the TFCD task force of TCFD. I always mix these letters. The task force of climate-related financial disclosure, more or less talking of how things should be presented and what should be presented. They have these 4 concentric circles. You have the metrics, how you work on things. You have the risk management on how you handle the risks. Then you have the strategy to where you want to go. And then you have the governance, how you govern your strategy so that you achieve what you want. And that should be explained in your financial disclosures. This is a very nice setting, and I have been preaching that actuaries should take this TCFD stuff seriously, because in all of these areas of this disclosure, I think actuarial analysis would help a lot to take things forward. Then we came to the high-level expert group on sustainable finance, and it presented, and it's more or less created the blueprint of what the EU is currently doing. We published our recommendations in January 2018 about the ideas of connecting the financial system with the real economy, seeing that this creates financial stability, and recognizing that there is a huge need of investments if EU is to attain its climate and energy targets, and then of course with the recognition that, well, both the public sector cannot solve the problem alone, it needs the private sector, but then on the other hand, not everything should be put on the shoulders of the private investors, because alone they cannot solve these sustainability goals. And the EU has continued, and when the previous speaker talked about the new Green Deal of Europe, then it is built on what this this high-level expert group produced more or less. It talks about a taxonomy of sustainable finance that is now developed, more or less identifying what are the sustainable investments that need, or what are the sustainable areas that are good for investments. It was about information, how to give better understanding to investors and clients, asset manager responsibilities, like the fiduciary duty, what it should mean, then European standards and financial instruments like European green bonds, and then other issues there. More specifically, it was talk about what it needs for different sectors of the financial services. It had thoughts about banks, insurance companies, investment firms, institutional investors, credit rating agencies, corporate governance. Now I'm more or less arriving to what I have to say on prudential regulation, more or less paving the way towards a better and more sustainable future. This is a little advertisement, because there's a book published by Cambridge University Press at the end of last year, Making the Financial System Sustainable, edited by Paul Fisher, who was one of the members of the high-level expert group. And this is not a little blurred, but this book has a chapter by me on sustainable finance and prudential regulation of financial institutions. So you will certainly get more from the nearly 30 pages of the text in that book, and also otherwise it's a book containing quite a lot of really the connection of sustainability and finance. But then when you talk about prudential regulation, you of course start from what is prudential regulation. It is about the idea to require financial firms to control their risks and hold adequate capital as defined by capital requirements. There is the exclusion that basically also consumer protection rules are included in financial regulation, but they are not usually considered to belong to prudential regulation. Then one of the concepts, and I think there is somewhat too little understanding of what these concepts mean. There are nowadays the concepts of a macro-prudential regulation and micro-prudential regulation. They are much better understood in the banking sector, where they more or less originated during the financial crisis. And they are less utilized and less understood in the insurance sector, maybe even less so in the pension sector. But I think insurance and pension sector are more familiar with this micro-prudential regulation that is really addressing the risks of a single financial undertaking, protecting the clients, creditors, and owners of a single undertaking. Then macroprudential regulation works on the societal or even higher level. It attempts to limit risks to the whole financial system, which is also called the systemic risk. If I give an example of how macroprudential regulation works, or let's say macroprudential regulation, there are two levels in that. One is the so-called structural regulation, and the other is the so-called counter-cyclical regulation. The structural regulation is more about regulating the very large players, the systemically important players. But then we have this counter-cyclical macroprudential regulation, and it is working now during the COVID-19 times with the idea that capital rules are tighter during the so-called good times, and they can be loosened during the bad times, so that financial institutions can help on getting along. And then this has really played a role during the COVID-19 downturn. Then the questions about prudential regulation and sustainability are really that, does prudential supervision have a clear role in making institutional investors do the right things, or do they do the right things even without capital requirements playing a role? And also then it's a question of whether this is a correct tool. Is it okay to expect investors to change the world for the better, or should it be done at the undertaking level, I mean in the real economy, prohibiting some things or setting tax policies and subsidies correctly? My example of this is that minced meat in the supermarket costs less per kilogram than veggies, even though the minced meat must have eaten 10 kilograms of veggies before being minced. Oh no, what happened now? And certainly just tinkering with prudential regulation doesn't change the game or make veggies cheaper than the minced meat. In current prudential regulation, we have three pillars. They are in their clearest form in the banking regulation, but they exist also in other areas. We have pillar one, which is about the quantitative requirements. Then we have pillar two about the qualitative or risk management actions, and then pillar three is about market discipline, or how to tailor disclosure requirements for institutions to publish what they do. And this is more or less the setting where we do the prudential regulation in all sectors nowadays. There are possible approaches to this. There's this neutral approach, which would rather be called the risk-based approach, trusting on each institution to take the risks into account in the most appropriate way, and then align their investments according to that. Then the second approach is to incentivize sustainable investments with lower requirements. Often this is called the green supporting factor, or GSF, deciding that one or the other investment is sustainable and then requiring less capital when the institution holds that. And then the third approach is to use this so-called Brown penalizing factor, BPF, that the second and third alternative can be used simultaneously. And then the discussion is whether or which one of these is the best alternative. Then about, so it has something on my screen now. Then about the tools used in these areas. Okay, it's shared again, isn't it?
Yeah. I think we lost the presentation.
Is it there now?
No, Esko, could you please share your slides again? There we go.
Is it? Yeah, there we go. Yes. Okay. Possible tools are like how to measure the measurement problem or the valuation of assets and liabilities, and especially the time horizon of measurement, because often the measurement horizon is too short to really show the sustainability aspects or reveal the sustainability aspects. Then what is the interplay of the measurement and the understanding of sustainability, what it means to the real capital requirements. Then stress tests are important, and the previous speaker already mentioned the ORA of IORP2 own risk assessment, but we have these similar processes in banking, where it's called ICAP, or the internal capital adequacy assessment process, or the ORSA in insurance and Solvency II, which is the own risk and solvency assessment. Then the possible conclusions about the role of these elements in prudential supervision probably are that, at least to me, it's difficult to see that tinkering with capital requirements like the brown penalizing factor or the green supporting factor would be the appropriate tool, because then it would be difficult to make them really coherent across all institutions, and even then other investors would react to the idea that they know one part of the financial sector is not obeying risk-based rules, meaning that they could, with, like, say, if there were a green supporting factor incentivizing investments into sustainability, these other players could draw their money out of the certain investments, just in fear that it is not working correctly. So I don't believe in these green supporting factors and brown penalizing factors. But where I believe sustainability has a huge impact is the second pillar, where we have this ICAP and ORSA and ORA and the risk analysis, and I feel that actuaries should have a quite big role in these analyses to integrate sustainability considerations into the investment process. And then pillar 3, disclosure using, for example, the TCFD framework is crucial to this all. So with that, I'm open to comments, questions, and hand over to Abe.
Thank you very much, Esko. Before questions, and please, if anybody has any questions, there's a Q&A possibility here on Zoom. So please use it. And please, Sarah, let's try to do this in 20 minutes to give way to question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I have actually got some slides now. Would it be possible to share my screen, please?
Yes, Sarah, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Thank you very much indeed. So, first of all, I apologise. I don't normally use Zoom. And so from that perspective, I hope that you can see everything okay. If it's not working, please let me know. So, fantastic. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Sarah Wilson. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about ESG measurement. But first of all, I would like to introduce who Minerva is and what makes us qualified to talk about ESG measurement in such an esteemed audience. My slides will be available for everybody afterwards. If we haven't got time to actually do all of the slides today, there are links embedded in the slides, which I hope that you will find really useful. On the right-hand side of this introductory slide, there's a lot more acronyms, and this is the thing about ESG. It really is alphabet soup or alphabety spaghetti. It is very easy to get confused by some of these acronyms. So the first thing that I would say that you do in your practice is write down the acronyms, make sure that you understand them and you've got an agreed definition shared amongst yourselves so that you don't get lost. So a little bit about us. So our organisation has been around since 1995. We've been providing proxy voting services to institutional investors since that time. And over the last 3 years, we have evolved our work into capturing ESG. But from the earliest days of the 90s, and I do actually point out to people, we actually were an online company before Amazon came into being. Only Mr. Bezos did a lot better than I did. And we were around before Google too, but hey, there you go. I've actually included some of our clients on there. You may recognize some of those names. So people like Nest, that's the UK's default auto-enrollment pension scheme. We're not currently operational in the United States for complex reasons, which I won't go into now, but it's just to say that the regulatory environment hasn't been very benign for organizations like ours, but we hope that is changing. So we're covering around 90% of the world's listed equities by market cap. And we have a very strong book of business looking at ESG research, ESG benchmarking and manager monitoring, and trying to help asset owners understand the exposures in their portfolios. That's a little bit about us. So ESG is the new inefficient frontier. It's incredibly inefficient, but has lots of possibilities, and I'll explain why it's inefficient at the moment. So institutional asset owners are real drivers behind the move towards sustainable investing. $1 in every 4 under professional management is institutional, and there's probably now closer to 25 trillion assets invested sustainably. This research was done by Morgan Stanley in 2018, and since then, over the last year, driven by regulation and just wider discussions about ESG, sustainable oriented investing is really growing. So asset owners do feel that they've got this responsibility to address sustainability. They want their pensioners to retire in a world that is actually worth retiring in. They want to see how they can integrate ESG into the investment process, but sometimes feel a bit confused about the best way to do it. And they have only actually been doing this really for less than 4 years. So I think it's important to bear that in mind. It's an incredibly young field. There is a lot of disagreement. There's been a bit of a gold rush in some areas, which is leading to accusations of greenwashing. And accurate ESG measurement is really crucial to getting behind the greenwashing. So we've got a number of drivers for good stewardship, sustainable stewardship. And number one is public awareness. And I think COVID-19 has really accelerated that. Now, I'm not going to play the video now, but what I've done in these slides is I've given you access to a YouTube video created by an organization called Quiet Room. They do communications for pension companies, amongst others. And they spent a day in Trafalgar Square asking passers-by what they understood about pensions and about ESG. And it's really, really worth a watch. I won't spoil it. No spoilers here, but it's definitely worth a watch. And you might, in your own country, you actually might think, oh, that's actually something that we might want to do in our own country too. So we've heard a little bit about the drivers. We've got hard regulation, and we've got soft civil society initiatives as well. So it's not just people like PRI, but the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they're being taught in schools, widely available. Companies are starting to talk about their linkages with the Sustainable Development Goals. And then there are organisations like in the UK, AMNT, member nominated trustees, Richard Curtis, he of Love Actually and other such movies, has actually founded an organisation called Make My Money Matter. He was the man behind Red Nose Day. He's actually been very closely involved in philanthropy for a long time, and he's actually realised that people really care about this stuff. But of course, caring isn't enough. We've got to make a good return. Pension trustees want to achieve good returns and good outcomes for their members, but their objective is to achieve those returns to be able to pay pensions. Within the regulations, there are two particular issues which have real impact on the measurement part. So I have lifted this from the UK experience. So this is the Department of Work and Pensions and the pensions regulators who've created this guidance about how you should integrate ESG, climate change and stewardship, and they are separated out into their three issues. So obviously having the views of the members, so it can't be down just to the chairman just to say, oh, well, I don't like that, or the trustees are saying, oh, that's not invented here. They have to take account of the views of members and then have a policy on how they're going to treat ESG issues. They can't have a policy to say, well, I'm not having a policy. They actually have to positively assert what their views are. They've then got to, and here comes, this is why this is in red, monitor those investments and report back to the members. And that requires data. And again, I've added a link here. The Sackers is a law firm. They're excellent. Their blog has got a lot of information in the public domain. And even if you are not actually based in the UK, it's a very succinct and accessible summary of the key issues. Also touching on issues like fiduciary responsibility. Are you breaching your fiduciary responsibility by incorporating ESG? We would argue you are probably breaching your fiduciary responsibilities if you don't consider ESG, climate change and stewardship, because risk is risk. And if you're not managing your risks and measuring your risks, you are actually leaving your beneficiaries open to unintended consequences further down the line. But let's have a little bit of a reality check about measurement and the problems of measurement. And there's lots of itties here, realities, availability. Is there actually information that you can use for measurement, whether it's perfect or not? And this is where the inefficiency comes in. Is it material information? So are the measurements that are being collected or offered to you, do they actually really matter for the investment in question? How you manage a real estate investment, it may not be the same as how you manage private equity or public equity. Is it believable information? Is the data credible? Has it been assured? Or is the company just saying, oh yeah, well, you know, we emitted X amount of tons of scope 1 emissions, but we didn't have it checked by anybody, so we just made it up off the back of an envelope. This is a real problem at the moment. And as we heard earlier, the EU taxonomy is having a very good go at trying to get some definitions, and the international accounting standards bodies are now getting in, and TCFD has played a very important role in this. Is the data accessible, and is the reporting accessible? How easy is it actually to then make a judgment based on the back of these information? So if you take nothing away from my presentation today, these are your 4 things to think about: availability, materiality, believability, and accessibility. Because unless we actually attack those 4 dimensions, whatever we're doing, it's going to be pretty pointless. And we'll probably burn a lot of carbon, electricity and carbon, in coming up with answers that people don't understand. Our approach is to recognize the imperfection of ESG reporting as it currently stands. Science evolves over time. Knowledge evolves over time. It evolves because we ask questions. So how we're approaching this is to say there are some good frameworks out there, the TCFD, the UN Global Compact, the OECD guidelines, UN Human Rights Guiding Principles, and the European Commission. So what we have here are 5 sets of standards, and these are all sort of sovereign supranational entities. These are not NGOs. These are not special interest groups. These are government authorities who've invested a lot of time and a lot of effort in actually trying to drill down and understand why these things matter and how they impact our global security. The most colourful of these frameworks are the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, they're only 5 years old, so they're also very new as well. And they are not without their problems. They're very aspirational in terms of how we address the way that corporations live in the world, how we live in the world, and the impacts of corporations on our lives. The problem is there are no agreed standards for how we should map the impact of the SDGs beyond the sovereign supranational level. So governments have got goals. You know, they can say N number of people who are living above $1 a day, X% of women in the workforce, or children not dying before they are 5. But for companies and investments, it's not so straightforward. The SDGs are not all investable either. So there are up to 244 indicators. And the reporting against that is incredibly rudimentary. The data quality is not brilliant. And by our own analysis of corporate disclosures, under 20% of them have got any kind of quantifiable or verifiable targets. So this is really very, very emergent data. So anybody who is coming up to you and rushing up to you and saying, oh, I've got this great idea for an index and we're going to do X. Well, the implications are, well, if you're going to build X and the data that's going in is a bit dodgy, is this actually a credible thing that we're going to do? So what I'm saying is don't not do it, but go in with your eyes open, that you can't set and forget. This is not something you're going to set up like an MSCI All World Index and then just walk away from it. This has to be actively stewarded and monitored as time goes by. So how we approach this is we look at sector-based metrics. We've converted the Sustainable Development Goals into some key themes, and those themes are linked to sector conduct. We look at controversial conduct by companies. So we heard earlier about the tailings dams catastrophes. There was a failure of governance at mining companies. They did not have systems in place to protect their workers and their stakeholders. It has cost a lot of money. So there are some very basic checks. And that kind of ESG controversy and how companies react to them is a very good indicator of the quality of management. We're looking at TCFD alignment because it is now mandatory in the UK. It's becoming much more prevalent in continental Europe. We're hoping now that US corporations will get with the program. Obviously, we've got a change of administration and EBSA and ERISA probably will have a change of emphasis in their rules and regulations too. So we'll see TCFD becoming the global standard. We're looking at the governance. We can measure how boards are responding to these risks and these demands by some of the metrics that they're putting in place. We heard earlier about ESG being linked to executive compensation. But this kind of mapping is very much in its infancy. The fund manager's data itself is actually quite poor in terms of what they report back. There is an absolute dearth of agreed standards. And without the standards, we're not going to get the interoperability of data that we need. But we've actually come a long way, even just in 24 months. What we then produce for our clients, for example, is we're then benchmarking their portfolios for them to show them where their companies sit against these frameworks so they can start to get some measurement and actually get a consistent view. So we look at business conduct, because that's related to the UN Global Compact, for example, and we can flag based on public disclosures from the companies where there may be issues. So there are different ways of actually doing this data. So measurement really does matter, because you measure what matters, what gets measured gets done. We are absolutely at the dawn of a new age of measurement. Companies are starting with climate disclosures, but we can't get companies to actually measure accurately their scope 3, which is the full impact on the climate of their activities. So we are definitely seeing, since we started doing this 5 years ago, when the majority of disclosures were extremely bad, there has been rapid movement over the last couple of years. Where we are now seeing issues is with the managers, the fund managers themselves, reporting back to the asset owners and reporting back on a consistent basis. They're not yet as ready as they need to be. It's easy to produce a report which takes the share price and the number of shares to produce a market cap. It is much more difficult to actually say, this was the water impact on your portfolio, when the companies themselves are not reporting. So don't not report, report but with caveats, because a null answer is still an answer. That a company is not disclosing and continues not to disclose is an important indicator of possibly the quality of management of this company. So just to return to the beginning, and I think I'm just about on time, measurement is very much at early days. It is rapidly improving. Trying to objectify the subjective is not easy, but there are great strides being made to actually improve that with standard taxonomies. We've all got to work together, and I think having meetings like this one are crucially important for raising these kinds of questions, so that we can get to a position where we're all on the same page and measuring the same way. But don't be distracted by people that suggest we should all have a single rating framework. That's actually going to be really, frankly, a nonsense, because if underlying pension schemes are being asked their individual views about different issues, that is naturally going to mean a diversity of perspectives. So locking yourself into a single framework at this very early stage, we think would be something really largely a fool's errand, but to keep an open mind about things. Climate is very much one of the early sets of regulations, which is improving rapidly. And within the next year, 18 months, we're expecting a lot of progress. Voluntary standard setters are beginning to merge their operations. And I believe that TCFD will also expand their scope of activity as well to go beyond climate. So Brexit notwithstanding, COVID notwithstanding, changes of administration notwithstanding, I'm not at all pessimistic about the direction of travel on measurement. Everybody understands how important it is. So I don't think that we're going to get stuck in sort of Swiftian arguments about big end or little end being the right end. We are moving in the right direction, and the more questions, the better. So at that point, I'm now going to stop and open the floor to any questions that anybody might have, because in our book, there is no such thing as a stupid question.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. Indeed, a very interesting presentation, and it gives us all food for thought. And well, please do post your questions on the Q&A. I mean, here on Zoom, on the bottom of your page, you can post your questions and your questions. In the meantime, the ones I already see. One is, how can actuaries work on the development of ESG measures, especially from as a risk management tool? And this is an open question for any one of you. So if you could, ladies first, Sarah.
So the first thing to nail down is how do you define risk? And I think everything flows from there. Is it on the risk of climate impacts? That one is relatively straightforward to measure in terms of looking at carbon, looking at whether the investments in there have actually, the organisation governing those have actually committed to reducing their carbon impacts. And that data is some of the most easily available, with caveats. That where you have got big gaps in some markets, particular Asia Pac, for example, you've just got to feel comfortable with having missing data, which is different to what you have been used to doing. And I think that's whereas within your professional organizations, trying to sort of get people comfortable with that idea that it is imperfect information, but we mustn't let perfection be the enemy of good.
But I suppose it's for actuaries, some of these topics may not be that familiar. So I think it's under just learning more about them. And again, for pension fund actuaries, one of the big issues is the reliability of the sponsor to the pension scheme, the employer, whether they're going to be around in a few years' time. And some of these ESG risks are absolutely huge. I mean, I gave the example of BP, but there's many like that. So it's understanding what's involved. It's not a question, if you're a pension fund actuary, unfortunately these days, it's not a question of doing the sums in the pension fund. You've got to look a bit wider and think, I've calculated a contribution rate, but if the employer is not going to be around to pay the contributions, it becomes a bit academic. Can I ask a question of Sarah? And I suppose there was a case in the UK quite recently of a major online fashion retailer, Boohoo, and yeah, and it just for other people's benefit, it was very successful and had a very high stock market rating, and I think it had quite a high ESG rating, and I suppose this is one of the problems. And what happened was there was some news story, I think there was some reality, that they were using, paying less than the minimum wage for production of their garments and things like that. So suddenly there was a big issue, and there was a big impact on the share price. I suppose the question is, we all want to make sure these ESG ratings are reliable, is what Sarah was saying. I suppose initially you need to tone down, don't we need to tone down some of the messages? It's not perfect, but we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, we certainly are. And I think when it comes to Boohoo, this was a really interesting one because under our rating framework, we'd known for a long time that things were not very well governed in that organisation. And there was quite a lot of greenwashing going on. And it just so happened, and this is why you can't just hang your hat on one framework. Because if you had been using MSCI, this comes back to nobody gets fired for buying IBM. Everybody must use a Big Four auditor. Everybody must use a Big Three credit rating agency. Actually, that's a really dangerous thing to do because you fall prey to groupthink, and you can sometimes miss things which are important. So that's actually really just a plea for diversity, and it's why we believe that multiple frameworks are actually very, very important. And it is one of the things that has, and I will be honest, it is one of the things that has concerned me a little bit about the EU taxonomy. It is very dogmatically trying to define things which are still young and unknown and evolving. And I'm really quite concerned about that because I come from a world of principles rather than rules. And we want companies to tell the stories that they need to tell. All data must be absolutely trustworthy. Absolutely no hesitation at all about that. But to say that there is a one-size-fits-all approach to measurement just fills me with dread as a concept. And it's this mosaic of information which actually yields much better insight, which I know is probably hard for actuaries who want to come up with a single risk number for a portfolio. But that's, you know, something that we face. Even a risk number is still the accumulated inputs of a series of subjective values and observations. So no, don't be pessimistic, because I think there's a lot of great stuff happening. It's just you've got to be prepared to kind of tear up your papers in 16 months' time and say, we need to go slightly back to the drawing board because now this has changed.
If I may
Yeah,
continue on that,
yes, please.
then well, a comment to Sarah certainly is about the taxonomy and the problem with this area where the science is moving forward all the time. I think my example would be that say a little more than 10 years ago, the taxonomy could have said that palm oil is good or diesel cars are the way forward. And certainly today, you absolutely wouldn't say something like that. The things might be good for CO2 emissions, but then on the other hand, they are extremely bad for biodiversity, which is maybe even more problematic than climate change. But coming back to the question of what actuaries should do, in my mind, it's a bit like the question, like Paul was talking of the fiduciary duty and how it has been expanded. I think to actuaries, it's a little the same issue, that you need to step out of your narrow-minded comfort zone to really start thinking for new issues. Like with the fiduciary duty, it's for the fund managers, it's much more than just looking at the short-term financial returns. It's about having a broader picture of what are really the ESG factors affecting the future of your undertaking, your pension fund, your insurance company, and having a broader view of what are really the essential questions of going forward. It really takes you out from your traditional actuarial courses to discuss and understand the wider issues around the concepts of sustainability. It's also like for us older actuaries, we have difficulties in understanding all the aspects of data science and things like that. We older actuaries might not understand all the issues in ESG. I hope in the next or the future courses for actuaries, there will be a better emphasis on these wider areas and an inbuilt understanding of what we need for the future.
Absolutely, Espo. Thank you. And we need more and different tools, and as you say, a broader view of the world. And as we were talking at the beginning, not only talking about numbers, but about concepts. And yes, we certainly need that in order to avoid. And this is not necessarily made by actuaries, but for example, and you talked, Sarah, about being skeptical and about greenwashing, and where some of these metrics lead to. For example, I just put on Google, I just looked for low carbon ETFs, and 9 out of 10 of the top ETFs are US government bonds. So I'm not sure if financing the US is the best way of decarbonization of the world economy. So can you comment a bit about that? the three of you.
You know, that is such a really good example, because over the last year or so, I have become much more exposed to ETFs, and I think, please, actuaries of the world, do not feel for one moment that you do not know what is going on in the world, because I can assure you there are lots of other people who frankly know not a lot about ESG, and a lot of them have just stuck what they think is going to be a fast selling label on a new product and try to squidge in a little bit of data to make it look good. I am extremely worried about the quality of many so-called ESG ETFs out there, who get rid of a few companies because they are bad actors, but then fail to actually apply an overlay of good sustainability governance thereafter. And I am sure that there is a scandal brewing, which we need to be very, very careful about. So yeah, people have got to take these products with a pinch of salt, and as much as measuring the companies that go into the portfolios matters, measuring what the ETF does is absolutely critical. So yes, as always, caveat emptor, and I think this is where informed gatekeepers like the sort of consulting actuaries can play a very important role. You know, you can check up on the PRI website. By the way, it's the PRI, not the UN PRI. Although the UN endorses it, the PRI, they're not a UN body, so it's just the PRI. The PRI reporting, stewardship code statements, looking at the marketing materials that the company produces, and to actually really kick the tires and to actually see how they are doing this. But yeah, rainbow washing, greenwashing, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of mislabeling going on out there.
Thank you, Sarah. Esko, if you want to add on this.
Probably not. Yeah.
Oh.
No, I think you know, I think we'll probably ended on the right note. It's certainly an area actuaries have got to get to grips with, but avoid the easy answers. I think the more you know about it, the better equipped you will be. And I think basically our role is to look to the future. We're not going to, you know, we're getting nowhere if we're just looking at the past, and the future is extremely difficult, as Esko was saying about biodiversity and climate change and things like that. The solutions are, we don't know what the solutions are. We've just got to do our best, but we've got to keep looking forward, not backward.
Well, if there's any organisation that can do the hard sums, it's the International Actuaries. So I'm sure that it's well within your capabilities. And actually, the logic and the rigor that you bring to the process, I think, is actually extremely welcome, because there can be sort of far too much abstraction and not nearly enough sort of concrete reality sometimes brought into these things. And the thing I would also say to any trustee is, yeah, there are lots of initiatives out there, but sometimes those can be seen as slightly political, single issue lobby groups. But just because there are lots of initiatives, don't feel compelled to have to join in to all of them if they are really not going to be contributing to investment success. By all means, out of office hours, go and contribute and spend your time with them. But you have to really think about that materiality issue. Is yes, it may be a tragedy, but how material is it to the investment process? And that's where those boundaries on fiduciary responsibility are always so important.
Well, one of the problems, I think, for actuaries, I was more concentrating on the E part of the ESG totality, but the S part is certainly one of the important areas, and I think that will be a difficult area for actuaries, because the S part contains like issues like social inclusion and equal treatment and non-discrimination. And what we actuaries often do is we want to differentiate the risks, and there we will run into troubles with the modern day that wants to see more social inclusion and anti-discrimination. So
Yeah.
I guess that will be one of it's somehow quite easy to work in the environment area. That we are working, we are going with the flood, but in like S issues, we might be working against the cultural and social trends playing dominant role in our societies.
Yes, there is increasingly a lot of evidence. I've just pasted into the chat session a recent paper that's come from the Rockefeller Foundation, which is an insight into ESG and financial performance. Some of these papers might not make it actually into sort of the actuarial journals, and sometimes this is where the multidisciplinary nature of ESG is actually so exciting. There is a very strong recognition now that it can make a real difference to performance. But some of the key takeaways from that study is the sort of things like inconsistent terminology, sort of the not looking at what are material ESG issues, obviously the problems with data, and also sort of confusion around different ESG investment strategies. But what that paper is also showing is it is improving, and that people are beginning to home in on what the most social issues. There is definitely a connection here between, having a well-paid, well-incentivized workforce means a better company performance over time, because that's the difference that company is going to bring. Is it's going to be able to produce better products. Consumers will feel more comfortable buying. Consumers definitely feel uncomfortable about buying products which they believe have been produced by slave labor. From the Victorian era onwards, people have understood, no, you don't send children up chimneys, you don't pay women less than you do men, and so forth. So I think people want to invest with a clean conscience as much as they possibly can. And you see boycotts happen all the time. Actually, I think the Chamber of Commerce has just said it wants to boycott NASDAQ, because NASDAQ has actually said board diversity is the thing that matters. And so boards, if you want to list on NASDAQ, you need to have diversity baked into your DNA. And you've actually got some people saying, oh no, that's wrong. Actually, the Chamber of Commerce is way out of line on this one, because CEOs, C-suite and employees actually have a sense of fairness as human beings, that it's wrong to exploit people, and people like to bring their whole selves to work, and they don't want to feel that what they're doing is somehow counter to their own sort of moral compass that they have. So yeah, a contented, well-rewarded workforce, and COVID-19 has really identified this, which is companies which are striving to look after their employees, they're the ones who are going to bounce back better first. And so from that perspective, you can't talk about human resources actually if they are just disposable resources. From that perspective, the workforce is not just a number, they're human beings as well. They are the savers, they are the pensioners too. So it is much more circular than it is a linear approach.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think with these last words that people are not only numbers, and I think this can be applied to all of what we're talking about. It's not only about numbers, although numbers do help us into the risk management of all these concepts. We need to turn all these multidimensional issues into numbers that can really help us avoiding greenwashing, etc. So thank you all very much. We will make this this recording available along with the slides. Please keep looking. We will let you know, but this will be posted on the IACA website. And thank you to our panelists very much for their engaging presentations and for sharing your knowledge with all of us. Thank you to all the participants, especially those for whom this is like very late in the evening or very early in the morning. But well, we hope to engage you in more of our series of webinars later on the year. Please keep safe. Thank you all and see you soon.
Thank you.
Yo.
Bye-bye.
Bye.